Why did WAAPA start? It's a classic Perth story. Well, it's a classic West Australian story, a Wazzy story, as I like to call West Australians, Wazzies, and I am a Wazzy, and I've got part of that, very much of that parochialism, and it's the parochialism that got WAAPA started. And it was a couple of people, one of whom is very well known, Dr. Jeffrey Gibbs, but it was a number of people, 4, 5, 6 of them formed a working party based on the idea that we were losing our best arts practitioners to the East Coast and to the rest of the world. Well, we can't do much about the rest of the world, but certainly the East Coast, we were losing people to the Victorian College of the Arts, the VCA, NIDA, National Institute of Dramatic Art. Those two particularly were taking our best players away from us. And the idea was if they go, they never come back. If they're trained here and we can bring also interstate people to train, we can get a lot more benefit for our performing arts and arts industry and just the whole area. The aim was to, right at the beginning, was to establish a world-class institution and to make it different by not just focusing like NIDA does on very discrete areas, such as just theatre primarily, with a bit of stage, technical stuff. Wanted to cover theatre, music theatre, dance, broadcasting, arts management, production and design, music. So that became classical, jazz, contemporary. There aren't too many institutions, one institution's covering that diversity of arts activity. So that's what's happened, and it's a fantastic area, Whopper. It's had a huge impact on Australian arts, without a doubt. It's had some impact internationally because we have got some international players who've made some significant contributions. But in terms of Perth, yeah, I don't think it's had a huge effect on Perth in a way. It has, but it hasn't. It has in terms of training Perth people up, but they're still going east because that's where the work is. And the Perth industry hasn't really developed hugely in terms of numbers and jobs. It's firmed up, it's expanded a little bit, but really it hasn't gone to the development that I would have expected a doubling of population would have led it to. And maybe there's just the sign now that it's starting to get a bit bigger. Apart from that, what WAAPA's done is, it's a bit like, I tend to think of it in some ways as it's a bit like when the formation of the Eagles happened. It means automatically you're playing on a national stage, which we weren't doing before. And WAAPA gave huge credibility to Western Australia's artistic area, and it's not so much its industry, but the people involved. And I often remark that in some ways, when I'm on the eastern states cities, there are more people there who are aware, just general run-of-the-mill people off the street who've heard of WAAPA, than off-the-street people in Perth who've heard of WAAPA. And that's a strange thing to say, but it does happen like that occasionally. I get the impression that it's better known over there. And that goes down in some ways to the quality of our graduates and the fact that they're over there. And getting national, not even if they're over there, they're getting national coverage, but it's also got to do with the intense focus on the publicity of us when WAAPA was established, of publicising us to the eastern states. And we did that well, and we're very proud of it. And I think West Australia should be proud of WAAPA because we play the game well. There is no doubt. There is no reason to say, oh, poor little Perth, or Perth does it, but not quite. We do it to the degree of anybody. If we were in New York, there'd be people proud of us because of what we do and the style of teaching. The arts, by necessity, most of it needs to be subsidised because it doesn't have a big enough market to support it. And Perth doesn't have a big enough population to support it without subsidy. So what's needed is more money. And I'm not saying that glibly, but it's a standard whinge in the arts. But there was a period in the history of WA in the last 25 years where the funding was far more than it is now. And it was a very different situation. It was a very buzzing little place, and it lasted for a good 6 or 8 years, and then the funding got wound back for political reasons, and we're about where we are now. There's enough to survive on, but not enough to do all those things that an arts company or a bunch of arts practitioners want to do. So there's enough to do, but not enough to do everything you'd love to do. And that would be nice for companies to have the freedom to explore and to develop, and not just be bound heavily these days by every decision is based on income. I'm sure that will happen. We're starting to see now some pressure from major mining companies, major business people to say, hey, this art stuff is important, because they know it's important, because they can't attract high-level employees here without it, because their families, those people's families are expecting it. So we're starting to see a bit of pressure being put in a nice subtle way on government, to just pressure in the terms of underpinning the importance to the social fabric of a city, of its cultural activities. And it is. It's not just a throwaway line. It's a really important part of a city, its cultural activities. And we've been seeing organisations like Form talking about one of the reasons that we lose our arts practitioners, our artists, our arts managers at a young age is because there's not a vital situation, scene, whatever you want to call it, happening. It's there, but it's not that vital, and it's easy to get attracted away. So if we can enliven it somewhat more, we can get a lot more activity happening, we can get a lot more people staying, a lot more contribution, a lot more thought being stimulated in our environment as well, in our society. The beauty of Whopper and training as an actor at Whopper is you're out of the focus of the big industry in Sydney, where you can start playing to that industry. Whereas here you can just take 3 years to develop your own style as an actor and your own voice and your own approaches without having to pander to any outside influences. You've got the freedom to do that because nobody's looking at you. Whereas in NIDA, from the first time you step on a stage as a NIDA student, there's industry people looking at you and making assessments about you. Here, you can screw it up for 2 years and blossom in your 3rd year in acting. It has no effect on how you're going to be assessed at the end of it when you want to enter into the profession. So that's the same for the whole arts. You've got a whole pile, because of that isolation, you can actually experiment and screw up if you like, and it doesn't have a great effect. You've got the freedom because you haven't got people looking at you intensely.